Welcome to Wealth Coherence. I'm your host, Emily Bouchard, a social worker specializing in human development and fascinated by human potential. For over 20 years, I've been a coach to families with successful businesses and leaders with successful careers, and you may be surprised to learn that true wealth is about coherence, when our inner state of being aligns with how we live, give, lead, and love. In this series, we will explore an integrated model to flourish coherently, because wealth isn't what we have, it's who we are when we are fully aligned. Well, welcome to this special edition of Wealth Coherence, where we are talking about purposeful prenups. And I am so delighted to get to introduce you to a colleague and a dear friend, Andrea Vacca, who I got a chance to meet doing a purposeful prenups whole experience from start to finish. And I'd love to have you share just a little bit about your background, Andrea, and then we'll just dive in to talk a little bit about the experience we had and what we learned in the process.
Okay, so it's great to be here, Emily. I'm really excited that you have this special series going on about purposeful prenups as part of your podcast, and you asked me to join you. So I'm looking forward to this. So, well, I've been a family law attorney here in New York for 32 years now. Wow. And about 15 or so years ago, it's been 20 years ago, I first heard about collaborative divorce. And then I became a mediator. And then about 5 years later, I decided not to litigate it all anymore. So I'm a completely non-adversarial attorney. My firm, Vacca Family Law Group, is a non-adversarial family law firm. And that stems, of course, divorces, you don't want to be adversarial, but prenups, you don't want to be adversarial either. Yes, and the traditional way of negotiating them can be very contentious, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And I realized that, it could feel like a mini divorce and you haven't even said I do yet. So we really do try to take everything we've learned about, more amicable divorce and apply it to our prenuptial clients and cohabitation agreement clients, which is becoming more and more of them too. So purposeful agreements at any stage of your relationship.
Oh, I would love to actually dive into the cohabitation agreement, because there's so many questions that I get about that too, in terms of, is it a legally binding document, or is it and it's more like it's an essential thing for you to have as a conversation with each other when you're about to move in together, or when you are, in terms of how you're going to blend your finances.
Yeah.
What the expectations are, and then what happens if you're no longer living together and you have these different things that you've invested in together. But could you just share a little bit about what exactly a cohabitation agreement is, how it's different than like a prenup, or why you would want to have it or not have it?
Yeah, well, the people who need or want cohabitation agreements are those who are consciously deciding not to get married, but they're in a committed relationship. They more often are buying real estate together, or going to be sharing home or homes together, and perhaps there's a financial component to that sharing. There's obviously a physical component to how we'll share. But what will happen during the relationship? How will we contribute financially to supporting our lifestyles? That could be part of the cohabitation agreement. It could be what happens with, especially if there's real estate being owned. How will we contribute to it? How will we divide it? How will we buy it together if we haven't yet bought it, or if we have already? How do we kind of reorganize what we did and put it in paper as to who put what down, or whatever? So it's very, very bespoke. There's no standard cohabitation agreement, because every relationship is so different, and it's really very creative. There's no law around it, except about real estate based on the title of how you own it. That's the only law, really. So we can do whatever the couple whatever's important to them. And more people are calling for them, which I find really interesting. People are more talking, I think, about it themselves. But it really just helps you, if the marriage or if the relationship ends, you're not going to be fighting about it. It'll be easier to know who does what, how are we moving out, are we selling the home, how do we handle buyout terms. And that just makes it easier to transition, from a couple to a non-couple. And then, of course, we can put pets in there. Sometimes people have animals that are really important to them, like how will we have pet sharing agreements or pet, contribution agreements. Mm-hmm. So again, it can be very much what this couple needs that are of a concern to them if the relationship should end.
Well, and I think too, because there are people that are choosing consciously not to get married, or maybe they even have reasons where it doesn't make sense for them to get married again, or maybe they're still married to a former spouse because of agreements or how intertwined their life is financially, and yet they want to be with somebody else. You can still have a cohabitation agreement to honor that commitment you have. What about if somebody passes away? Because I think that's the other piece too, right? Like if you're not married and you're totally committed and you're living together and you're having this life together and one of you dies, does a cohabitation agreement also help with at the time of that death? Or is that something that would be handled more in your will or in your trusts or that sort of thing?
It would be, it definitely needs to be in your will if you're trying to deal with estate rights, because there are none unless you put it in your will. But if you want to ensure, like someone can change a will at any time, as you know, I would prefer to contract in the cohabitation agreement about perhaps life insurance being in place. And so that if there is no will or trust in place, the life insurance kicks in or something like that. So it's a backup. So if that's a concern, we would work with their trust and estates attorneys. If a trust can be created, fabulous. At least maybe there's a will and definitely some life insurance if it's a very, unbalanced financial situation that they have.
Yeah. I can also see where it would be really helpful. And I work with a lot of clients where somebody comes with a lot of resources, they have a trust, and there's a lot of emphasis on whatever's in the trust needs to stay in the trust, and you're going to use the money, but whatever that you buy with it is going to be in the trust. And what if like the other partner isn't necessarily coming with financial resources, but maybe they have really great skills. Maybe they could do a whole renovation of the building and they can help make it gorgeous and they can have the sweat equity in it. But if they don't have any ownership, is there a way that like a cohabitation agreement or even a prenup could come up with some sort of fair way of assessing like the value that they put in?
Definitely. I would highly recommend that for either of these agreements. Property is going to always be in one person's name or in the name of a trust, and there'll be no legal rights to it. But there'll be sweat equity or some other support, even not around the house, but about with regard to their lifestyle or something else. Then we should address that. How will there be some contribution now during the relationship or after to help provide some contribution back to the person who was giving that fiscal equity, I guess.
Yeah. That kind of brings us to the prenup experience we had, where the couple, when the woman came with tremendous financial resources and he came with tremendous emotional support resources and a great EQ, and they had to really look at, they have very different views on terms of debt versus security and not wanting to cover somebody's debt but yet paying off their credit cards. How do you create an agreement where both people's values are taken into consideration, but where one person isn't saddled with the behaviors of another that they don't particularly align with?
Well, first, having them found someone like you, I don't know if I would have been able to meet. This was a mediation, as you remember. I was working with this couple, and they were just at odds on what financial security meant to them. But it wasn't. I couldn't really land on what the issues really were. The very surface. They found you on their own, and they came back to another mediation session. It might have been our second or third. And I remember the female in this couple looked completely different. Her whole energy, she was lighter, like his weight was off her shoulders. She looked younger. I said, "What? You look great. What happened?" "We found somebody. We found a money coach," they said. And I said, "Who is this person?" And that's how you and I met. Because I said, "You did magic. You worked magic on them. You helped them understand that." Her fear of, she hated debt. She couldn't stand the idea of having debt. She'd never had to have it. He was so comfortable with debt and with spending. And they were raised in very different cultures, family cultures, and money was just very different to them. And you really helped them to understand each other and just respect where the other person was coming from. And that opened up a lot of room for discussions on how to make them each feel secure.
Yeah, and come up with a creative solution that really did honor both of their value systems. And what was so interesting about it too was I spent time with her in particular to have her see that he wasn't going to change. Like she was marrying this person and this persona. And I often liken it to like an animal, like a tiger has its stripes, a leopard has its spots. It's like they're not going to change them around. They're not going to not have stripes once they're, and it's more about loving that animal for what they are and really being reality about it. Because it's like her depth of discomfort around debt was always going to have an impact on how they related. And so we had to have some way to counterbalance that with what she really valued that he brought to the relationship, and could those counterbalance each other. And as long as there was respect and there was great communication, they were able to come up with a really good plan that worked for them. And that we worked with the financial advisor that she had. We worked with 2 attorneys, right? They each had to have their own attorneys. And then we also did a deep dive into their New York State laws and what the solution they came up with, would it actually work within the confines of the law too, right? Because that's
I do recall that now that you mention it, right?
Yeah,
so it's very creative, but it worked for them, and so that's the beauty of really understanding what's important to you. And not everybody is coached to do that in their prenup or their cohabitation agreement or the divorce for that matter. So.
Yeah. And with all your experience doing prenups and all the different kinds of couples that come into your space, when you work with people that have an inheritance, they have a trust, and they come in to have this conversation about the prenup, what are some consistent themes you've seen that seem to really matter, that need to be addressed in the prenup, or that make the biggest difference for those couples when there's a disparity like that?
When there's a big disparity?
Yeah.
Well, the biggest thing that we need to, what does financial security mean to each of them? It's going to be very different. And the other theme with someone with a lot of wealth is it generational wealth? Is there a family behind them that is putting a lot of pressure on them, whether active or passively? It just could be like voices in their heads about what money means. It might not even be them, but it could be, the grandma, or it could be just messages they grew up with. So there could be a lot of generational messaging that gets in there. It could be a lot of emotions tied to even if it was wealth that they alone created. They created a business, they created the successful life, and they don't want to lose it. And it was really hard to get where they are. And so that's another theme that we have.
So either like an overwhelming sense of responsibility about the legacy that they've been handed, or a deep sense of this is something I've worked so hard for, not wanting to lose. And it is an interesting orientation when you come from that, right? Because it's much more different than if it's just like, hey, this is a really good idea, we should do it as a couple, to, oh, there's all these other things at play here. So it sounds like it's really important for people to get clear on, for the sake of what would they want to have a prenup, and why it matters to them. And oftentimes it's about, this money's not just mine, it's meant to be stewarded and be utilized within the bloodline of my family or of me going forward. And that tends to be in the most common stipulations that I see from families, like that it needs to stay within the bloodline.
There'd be so much pressure on the person getting married. Like, if you don't do what we want, we might remove you from these documents. You might not get what we always promised you. There could be a lot of pressure, and sometimes it doesn't feel good at all to anybody.
No,
and sometimes it's not like that at all. It's more. Sometimes it's not overt like that at all. It's really just, this is how our family is. This is family money. I feel responsible for it. I want to protect, the business that my grandfather built and my father or mother continue to run. And, I can't. I don't want to risk anything for my family if my marriage doesn't work out.
Yeah, and I think that for whatever reason that you're coming to it, whether others behind you are saying you need to, or whether you feel like, oh, I'm responsible, I should do this, or just being overwhelmed, maybe even you have the trust and it's in your name and you have complete access to it, and it's like, oh, I think a prenup makes sense. It's more about that purposeful aspect of it, of what is it we want to do in our relationship when it comes to money? And how do we want to be thinking about really important, significant things that could happen in the future with us with money? So it's being able to bring your best self to that conversation, I think, is what
and being willing to ask what is important to my partner. And they have to feel confident enough that they have a right to say what's important to them. Just because they don't have money, they're entering into an economic partnership that has rights and obligations under the law. And without this prenup, they would have many rights because they are giving of themselves to this relationship. They're legally tying themselves to this person. There are rights and obligations that come with that. And when somebody asks someone to waive all of their rights and take, basically nothing because one's wealthier than the other, that feels really bad. So I never encourage people to start that way, where you make a proposal and say, this is what I'm proposing. I've always wanted to start with as a conversation.
Yeah. What is it we both are wanting, and getting clear on what the expectations are going into the marriage too. Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. If you're enjoying this conversation about purposeful prenups and want to know more about how to have that conversation and start it out well and strengthen your relationship, you can go to emilybouchard.com and you can download a free copy of Beginner's Guide to Purposeful Prenups and get started. Now back to Andrea. Well, welcome back to Wealth Coherence and our special edition on Purposeful Prenups. I'm getting a chance to talk with Andrea Vacca, and we are in part 2, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to make it so that the prenup conversation, since it is a legal conversation, can be the most collaborative possible for the couple versus adversarial. Because one of the reasons I got so passionate about purposeful prenups was because I would witness the fallout of it being treated adversarially for couples, and how it impacted their relationships. And it seems like we can do something to shift that. So, Andrea, why don't you tell us a little bit about a current situation you're in right now and what you see are ways to make it less adversarial and more collaborative?
Yeah, I would love to share more about the matter I was just talking to you about offline, but it does remind me, as you just said, the fallout. It can also affect your children. So if a badly negotiated prenup affects your marriage, and if you have certain personalities in that relationship, they can drag in the children. I had a client once getting married, and he told me his mother, since he was a child, would complain to him since he was a child about how the husband, his father, had presented the prenup to her. She resented it the entire marriage, even though they voided the agreement during the marriage at some point. He said, I am getting rid of this prenup. She still harbored such resentment and anger. It affected the children, and of course affected this poor man's attempt to get married himself and what a prenup meant. And he had his father in the room with him for support, not his mother, but it was so it really does have generational ramifications if you don't do this well. Okay. So let's keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I'm working with a very nice gentleman right now who's about maybe 20 years older than the woman he's marrying, and he is a beneficiary of a trust with tens of millions of dollars in the corpus, and he gets a lot of money every year that he gets his income from the trust, and he has some other passive income that comes in, and she has no income. And this is okay with him, and he wants to take care of her, and he wants to have children with her, and wants to have a family together. It's really important to him. And so he doesn't know exactly what he wants or doesn't want. He just wants it to feel fair and that everyone feels secure. So I reached out to her attorney, who I know, but is a traditional litigating type of attorney. And I said, hi, I'm representing the future husband here. We'd like to know what is important to your client. What does she want? What would help her feel secure? And the other attorney said, well, it was like silent. She said, no one's ever asked me that before. You're the moneyed spouse. Why would you be asking me what my client wants? Usually I just get a proposal of an agreement for review. I said, we could do it that way, but we didn't think it would go over that well. We really would like to understand what's important to her. And she hadn't even had this conversation with her client, because why would she? It was so not on her radar that so we said, well, we would like to do it this way if possible. So let's exchange information and let's find out what's important to each of them. So we're going to try and do it this way, but it was the fact that she had never been asked that question when she was representing the lesser moneyed, spouse or partner, I thought was very interesting. This person's probably been practicing as long as I have,
Yeah, it brings up a good point in terms of like the work that I do with the emotional side, right? Because the moment somebody who is not the non-moneyed partner in this relationship is asked that, there's this sense of, can I ask for what I want? Is it okay? Am I going to have repercussions if I ask for what I want? How much can I ask for that's not going to be perceived as greedy? Like there's just so many nuances to stepping into, okay, this is who I am, this is what I want, and allowing that to be expressed and have that safety and intimacy in a partnership to have that. And I would say for the moneyed the partner in the relationship that are getting ready to get married, especially when they want all these things, the children, the life together and everything, they want their beloved to have what they want, but not at the expense of the, I don't know, whatever the agenda is with that money, whatever values have been attached to that money already. And when you start from that place of, hey, we can both have legitimate desires and wants are different than needs. And it's okay to express what you really want. And, you can go for it, like, oh my gosh, I want to be able to live in our house for the rest of my life. And I want to be able to have these wonderful, the wonderful lifestyle that we have. And I want it to be with you, of course. But, if you pass away, I'd still love to have that. And I think it's always good to start with the death part of the prenup before you do the divorce part, because it does come from that place of, oh my gosh, one of us is going to lose the other one. And what do we want for this relationship, for our kids, for that person who survives? And then to move from there to the divorce piece. I don't know. What do you see there?
Unfortunately, we usually start with the divorce. And I do agree, emotionally, all marriages end by death or divorce. Mm-hmm. We could start with the death. It would make things probably a little less feel adversarial or someone did something wrong. Like this is just a natural part of life. If all goes well, one of you is dying during the marriage. Like that's your best case scenario, right? So yeah, I'm going to think about that. Thank you. I'll think about raising it in that order, It definitely comes up and we go over it.
Yeah, because, it's all about love, money, loss, grief, power, right? There's so many different pieces to this. And I think for couples that are able to navigate this well, they can handle anything, right? Like, as you're able to have these conversations about some of the most painful things that we can anticipate, the rest is kind of breezy.
So, yes.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you have to get those hard conversations out of the way, and then the rest are just the details, those big puzzle pieces, like what's important to you, then we can fill it in.
Exactly. And now, since you mentioned that you have a collaborative law practice, would you just share a little bit about what's distinct about that versus a typical legal practice?
Yeah, sure. So, well, in the collaborative process, it's applied usually to divorces, but we've used this process for prenups too. But in a divorce, there are four main components to a collaborative divorce. First, you need two attorneys that are trained in the collaborative process. And that means that we're agreeing to negotiate the terms in a non-adversarial way. There's no threats or duress during the negotiations. There's full financial transparency or information transparency. We are agreeing not to litigate. These attorneys are agreeing we will never go to court with you. So if you cannot come to an agreement for this process, we will never be representing you in the court system. And we're always keeping the best interests of the children at front and center in the negotiations if there are children involved, or if you're expecting to have children in a prenup. So you can apply a prenup to all those concepts to the prenuptial agreement, where we're having open conversations. I'm talking to my I don't even call them my adversary. It's my collaborative colleague. The other attorney, the language we use, the modeling of language and behavior is very respectful and collaborative, so that we can help our clients calm down the temperature and find more base level emotions and not let those emotions hijack the process.
Yeah.
And there's a mental health professional on the team. In New York, we call it the family specialist. They're called coaches or facilitators in other locations. And we have a financial professional on the team. Those are two neutral positions that help the clients manage their emotions and communication and child-related issues and the financial issues. So
And
that's the collaborative process.
And I like that it's also, they're objective, right? It's not somebody that has a vested interest in the choice that you're going to make one way or the other, right? Like the financial side, that's so important.
Right.
And I love it too, because it really does come forward as the couple is the client, as opposed to this is my client, this is my client. Even if it is an individual client, there's still this sense of you as part of a couple. And I think that that's what sometimes can get lost in how the legal profession is designed in terms of, protection of my client at all costs kind of things. And it's like,
the other important issue here that I didn't mention is that the negotiations are based on what's important to you, as we've been talking about, not on your positions. So a position could be, I must keep the house. And an interest could be, I want to keep the house because the carrying charges are low, and this neighborhood works for us, and we still walk the kids to school, and one of us has to live here. I'd like it to be me, or whatever it is. Like, what's really important to you about that thing that you're saying is so important? I want to understand both clients and understand what's important, so we can find more solutions.
Yeah.
That's a big component of the collaborative process.
I'm so glad you emphasized that. And I think it's a really useful way to think about any kind of negotiation or conflict that you're having in a coupleship, right?
Yeah.
Is like, wait, what's mattering to me here? Like, what is important to me here? Not like demanding what you need. Like, it's just a different orientation towards it. And it doesn't mean you're giving up something. It's more that you're coming at it from a different angle, which is like, things are important to you, things are important to me. How do we look at how to make it work for both of us, right?
And you need the right professionals around you to get that information. You don't always know yourself. Some can just feel like a really strong need, but why? It's the why questions that your professionals around you need to be asking and to draw that out of you.
Yeah. Keep going deeper and deeper into, okay, so, and then what? And so if you have the house, and then what does that give you? And then what does that mean? And and I think it's also about, okay, so you're thinking about it right now from the standpoint of the children either not being born yet or quite young. What about if something happens after they're empty nesters and they've left and there is no walking them to school? Does it still have the same gravitas and importance to you, or is it a different picture, right? So I think that's important for them to be aware of too.
Definitely.
Wow, it's such great work that you're doing, and I can see how the couples really benefit from it. And then when you work on the other side, when couples come to you for divorce, how does it work when you're doing the divorce proceedings, if they have a prenup or if they don't have a prenup?
Well, we always ask, of course, is there a prenup or a postnup? Sometimes people enter into agreements during the marriage for some reason. So we always ask that, and we start there. Like, what did you already agree to? And are we going to follow that agreement? A lot of people change. They might have said no spousal support, but then they realize, because life has shown itself that I could afford spousal support. My spouse needs spousal support, and so maybe we'll set that term aside, or we'll modify it in some way. So it depends on how, what the terms are, but we always start and see what that says, because that's your enforceable agreement. Was it a valid agreement? First of all, we'll make sure it was entered into, correctly. But after that we have to start there for any issues that were addressed. And the more amicable they can be, the more flexible we will probably see around these. Sometimes it's like one person's going to be so harmed if this agreement is followed. Because they were so one-sided. And, hopefully, if they're coming to us for a non-adversarial divorce, they're more open-minded and are realizing, I would not be ethical to hold my spouse to those terms. We've created this life. We probably have children, whatever it is. I want them to be okay. So if they're coming to us, they're probably not saying, this is ironclad and I'm not doing anything different.
Yeah, it's totally self-selective, right? If you go to an attorney that's absolutely not going to go into litigation, it's a certain type of mentality. And it's nice to kind of highlight that is very much a reality. There are people that want to divorce amicably, that they really do want to honor their spouses. And it doesn't have to be such an adversarial, horrific, winner takes all kind of approach, because nobody wins in that instance, especially if there's children. So I think that's great. One last question I have in terms of the work you've done, because you've done so many. What recommendations would you give to people that do have children when it's a second, third marriage, when there's a blended family situation? Is there anything in particular that you think, they really want to make sure to focus on something that otherwise might not have been in their awareness?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because if there's a blended family, and even if the children are all adults, understanding if there are any financial obligations that either partner has to a former spouse or children legally or ethically. Have they been paying for their apartment, subsidizing a young adult's lifestyle, maybe helping their mother or other relatives in some way? So how are other family members being supported by your partner? And what are the expectations going forward for where that money will come from in the future? Is it coming from the marital money that you're creating together? Or are you expecting that, will it be limited in some way? Will there need to be conversations if it's more than a certain amount? Everyone's different, but I see that's can be very stressful in a divorce, a lot of resentment. And so having those conversations up front about how we're supporting those family members is a time well spent. And
I think that's one of the most powerful things about a prenup conversation, is because you do need to be transparent about your financial obligations, your financial resources, and it makes it so that the expectations that you're coming into the marriage are explicit, right? And you really get to find out what are the resources that we get to share and pool together, and what is already spoken for. And I think that's really important too, like especially if there's a life insurance policy that needs to be paid annually that has a pretty big chunk. Where does that come out of? But that's not going to the new spouse, right? That's going to maybe the former spouse. And it's you want to make sure people know about that ahead of time, and to really have that sense. And then also the other side is when you're coming to the relationship and you're not getting spousal support, or you're not getting the child support that maybe you even deserve, and you're remarrying, and that person's going to be taking on a lot of responsibility with a child and all the finances, and that you're not bringing those to the relationship too. That's also something to be acknowledged as well, so that there's not any expectation that they will or won't have to take on that responsibility. So
right, how will these expenses be paid? And yes, that you do not have an obligation if our relationship ends. And sometimes people are giving up spousal support to marry somebody new.
Mm-hmm.
So how will that be? So there will be some expectation that this person will be putting money into the house. Maybe you're moving into someone's house and he or she was getting spousal support, now they're not. You have to look at where people are, how they're living their lives, what will be changing as a part of this new relationship, and how to make each of you feel like it's as economically fair as possible.
Right. That's the key. And what's fair to each couple is different. That's why they are bespoke. So
sometimes I'll see lawyers ask out on listserv, can anyone send me a simple prenup as an example? I'm like, that's malpractice. You should not be practicing. So do not don't go to an attorney who's never done this before, because there are no simple prenups. There are no templates for a prenup other than the boilerplate language. Everything has to be what is important for the two of you and what the life you want to have lived. So just make sure you're talking to people who know what a prenuptial agreement is and have seen all different types, so they can give you more advice on what could possibly work for you.
Yeah, that's so great. It's a good place to end, because I think, making sure that you are taking seriously the unique status that you as a couple have, and don't be afraid to have those conversations and ask for what you need from the legal advisors that you're working with.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrea. This was great. So appreciate your time and your wisdom around this topic.
Always a pleasure talking to you, Emily. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wealth Coherence. If it resonated, I'd love for you to share it or leave a review. This will help others find their way to this space. And if you're ready to keep exploring what it means to live, lead, and give from a place of coherence, head to emilybouchard.com to stay connected. Until next time, be well internally and allow your external life to be the fullest expression of who you truly are.